you went to Hawaii for the Davos of the data center sector. The name of the conference you went to, the Pacific Telecommunications Council Conference. Why are these people getting together in Hawaii?
Exactly. So every year, tons of people in the infrastructure sector, going from data centers to networking to subsea cables, meet up in Hawaii at this longstanding conference called PTC. And the reason that I go to this conference is that all of the hyperscale cloud providers go to this conference to start talking about deals for the year and, maybe even signing deals. Lots of bankers, lawyers go to this conference. So a lot gets done and you kind of get a good sense for what the year ahead is going to look like. And so this year, one of the big themes was obviously execution. I think, I heard that from every single person I talked to that, you know, don't expect more big flashy announcements. Like a lot of companies kind of just need to put their heads down and make sure projects are on track and hitting deadlines. So that was definitely the biggest theme for me coming out of the conference.
And then with execution, are people optimistic that they will be able to achieve that execution, or is there nervousness?
Definitely across the industry, I think everyone realizes that not every project is going to get done on time. And, there could be some pretty unfortunate situations where developers are missing timelines, their costs are doubling, and maybe they get kicked off a project, maybe the project stalls. And you know, plenty of people think that their projects are going to be fine, their data centers are going to get built, their customers aren't going to walk away, but they're sort of signaling, that project over there might not get done on time. And so I think that'll be interesting to sort out through this year. People are kind of viewing this as a shakeout. We're going to see which operators are building quality data centers and which operators, are not going to be able to deliver. But I think the overarching sentiment is that if any of these projects, run into a major problem, that could freeze up financing for all projects. So I think everyone has an incentive for things to keep moving forward because one hiccup here or there could actually affect future projects for
And
companies.
and that is how the cascade. I mean, I've sort of been looking for an explanation for how this cascade could tumble. So really, the financing is what could tighten up then down the line.
That's what people are saying for sure, and I think that's right because, you know, someone actually has to give you money to go out and do this. So even with NVIDIA investing the $2 billion in CoreWeave, that's great, but they're still gonna have to look at project financing. And
Mm.
so that is the thing that people really don't want to freeze up because then, things just won't happen on time and they'll have to wait.
Now, another part of this that we've talked about on this show is demand being a key indicator of whether or not these data center projects actually achieve ROI in the long run. How much discussion was there about demand on the ground there? Did you get a sense for if it's still accelerating, or is there any risk that it's, starting to plateau even in some cases?
From what I can tell, demand is still soaring. So, I don't even think anyone brought up, worries about demand slowing.
Right.
Actually, there were some
Big green light.
yeah, but there were some companies who came to the conference, looking for small amounts of data center capacity, maybe 30 megawatts or 50 megawatts, and they walked away with nothing. So I think that demand is still super high in the industry. But of course, I'm talking to people who have a invested interest in that always being the case. But I do think that demand, at least for the next 2 years, is pretty booked out.
Now, you talked about CoreWeave and the possibility that they could try to diversify their chip reliance. Was there discussion about all the other chip players and even Google?
Yeah, surprisingly, in Hawaii, tons of people were excited about Google being aggressive on getting its TPUs out into the market. And that was honestly a little bit surprising to me because in years past, the conversation was all about the different model developers, who's working with XAI, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google. But this year, it seemed like the actual hardware inside the data center was what people were getting really excited about. And I think particularly from investors and operators, they're seeing Google in the market doing unusual finance arrangements where they're maybe backstopping a developer's debt or backstopping their lease, and that can make a project very easily financeable. And so I think people are kind of wondering, is Google going to make Nvidia start to do more of these, financial arrangements with data center companies to help with financing? So
Hmm.
definitely lots of excitement and talk around Google and TPUs for sure.
And what about power?
Yeah, I mean, power is still a big concern for everyone. But everyone is sort of on different sides of it. Some people were there saying that behind the meter gas turbines were going to be the solution. So you had every gas turbine company basically looking for cloud providers and AI companies who might, not want to wait for the grid and install their own power supply at their data center. But then there were, other startups I talked to who were saying actually the grid is underutilized and we could get more power from the grid if we did things a little bit differently. But I think the whole, ecosystem around operating with utilities, trying to convince communities to put up new gas power plants, there's definitely a lot of complexity and differing thoughts on how to tackle this problem. But by and large, power is, going to be a big constraint. But I think, people are going about the problem in different ways.
And you also wrote about how those communities. I mean, I don't know if there were people, local government regulators at this conference, but that was also the discussion you wrote in your newsletter, that the pushback from local communities may actually be, in some cases, an even bigger hurdle than something like power.
Totally. A couple CEOs told me that the community resistance might be a bigger hurdle, and I think that's pretty telling. This has kind of been something that the industry has known about for a long time. What are we doing to make sure that residents know we're good neighbors? And now that we're in this fast-paced AI build out, I think people are kind of realizing we haven't really done a good job of this at all, and now this is the most critical time to be building, and we're kind of confronting this problem as we're trying to build as fast as possible. So everyone is, pretty concerned about it, but I wouldn't say that I heard any solid solutions on how companies are going to go about fixing this. I think top of mind for everyone is just finding markets where the local government and community actually supports what they're doing. But that's pretty hard to do. So everyone's going to be fighting over those same locations.
Great. Well, Anissa, I'm glad that you had a productive trip to Hawaii. It's a good reporting trip. I'm sure many of us wish that we had, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us everything you learned. That is Anissa Gardizy, our cloud and compute reporter here at The Information.